Thank you all for joining us today. Maybe we quickly go around and introduce ourselves. Tell us everyone your name, company, brief description, and maybe your least favorite customer.
Hi all, I'm Sky. I'm with Cake. We make AI infrastructure a piece of cake. We have about 120 open source apps that we deploy in customers' VPCs so they don't have to egress data. My least favorite customer, they're probably, my least favorite and my most favorite customers are the same. They're the ones that push the platform, and that's always painful, and I'm always pissed at them, but it's always the ones that make us better, and so they're sometimes the most fun.
Hi, I'm Jason. I am the Googler here on the panel, so I lead our first-party models for Vertex. So if you're an enterprise buying anything from Gemini to our VO video gen model, Imagine, Chirp, Lyria, our embeddings models, you're probably buying through Vertex. I love all our customers equally. I think that there's the customers that want to partner with us, that really want to help us understand their business needs, that we can serve them better, are the ones that I think make the fastest progress in actually changing our services. So I have a cohort of favorite customers, but they do tend to be noisier. So you can mistake those quite easily.
Okay, I'm Gennady. I'm CEO and co-founder of CentML. I'm also professor at the University of Toronto in computer science. So CentML is focused on optimizing your AI/ML workload, making them run faster and cheaper for you. I think it's a big focus for us is obviously on making all these LLMs run cheaply for people, like making sure people can actually afford building really good stuff with it. In terms of customers, I think I'm very similar. I don't think there are bad customers for us. It's like everyone who's willing to try our stuff and pay for it is definitely welcome.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to start with some hot takes. Then we're going to address everyone's favorite 600 billion question, or 1 trillion, whatever the number is, on AI production deployments, and then we'll close out with opportunities in AI. Let's start with open source. What do you think is the role of open source in AI model deployment, especially since so many of the recent models are very close to the frontier and there's a lot of competition internationally heating up? We can start with whoever. Sky, do you want to go first?
Sure. This is really a hot take. So the first thing I would say is that open source models are the anomaly. And I think it's really important when people are thinking about open source in AI, that models are the core, but a very small part of real world execution of things. And in AI today, with the limited exception of LLMs, transformer models, everything else is better in open source. And the cathedral bazaar rules still are true. We do see, from a costing perspective, there's a huge amount of VC money that is just being burned, making tokens cheaper, and that's great. It's a great time to be there and building businesses on these models because tokens are so cheap. That said, I do expect, we're already seeing open source models catch up for a brief period of time, API models jump ahead for a little bit, and it's going back and forth. The cycles feel like they're shorter where open source bounces back. But I think over time, open source is going to win out. It wins everywhere. Where there are opportunities for open source today, we see it over and over again where customers in either regulated industries or customers that have an understanding that their data is insanely valuable, they're afraid to push a lot of that data to big AI. They're afraid of giving away those crown jewels. And so there are opportunities today with open source models to deploy them in customer VPCs, even when the financial incentives are not really that great. But I do think open source is, in even models it keeps winning.
I can't wait for Jason's rebuttal now.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe there isn't a rebuttal.
So I think we should probably draw the distinction of open source versus open weights.
Right.
As well. Not every model that's openly available to use is truly open source. Google is investing in releasing in the Gemma family of models, and will keep pushing out better and better open source models. So it isn't like they're truly in conflict. I think those models will be slightly behind the closed source, but as the floor keeps coming up on the intelligence that's being released through the open source models, the percentage of tasks that can be accomplished with the open source models, and open source or open weights, depending on your business size and your own tolerances, that as that floor keeps coming up, the closed source community will address a different customer over time, probably. And so we'll democratize most tasks. We've also reduced the form factors by like 100x. We've dropped prices on the closed source models by 95% in the last 24 months. I mean, there's like things are moving so quickly that I don't think there's not a clear winner as of today. Closed source is still ahead. I do think that the folks training closed source models, because there's a clear profit incentive around those ecosystems, will probably devote a disproportionate amount of compute to those models and even the self-improvement cycles around those models. So developing more compute that helps to make the models better, faster, is something that's kind of new. So instead of having humans create every new iteration of every idea, now you can just throw a lot of compute at things. We have AI co-scientists. It's how do you validate 1,000 hypotheses? And then how do you scale that 100x from there? I think you need to have some sort of financial incentive there. And at the end of the day, a lot of the open source, open weight providers have their own incentives. They're doing it for their own reasons as well. So I've been doing this for long enough to have provided massive amounts of compute to the labs that are training these models as well in my previous role. And so, these are, hundreds of millions and billions of dollars a year worth of spending to produce that open source model. So there's look behind the scenes at who's doing it and why as well, I think is the interesting part.
Gennady, you can pick your own adventure. Either add on to this, or you can address the next question on
I'll
hardware.
start with the previous one. I think it's a nice one as well. So on the open source model, we actually started our company just before ChatGPT came out. So we started it when pretty much all the models we focused were open source models, but there was no one obvious winner. Were models like GPT that open source. OpenAI still had open source models back then. And then out of a sudden, everything changed overnight. Everyone jumped on this fancy OpenAI model that everyone seems to be so behind. And the first existential crisis for our company was, how are we going to deal with that, right? And whether you can actually build any sustainable business when there is a few players like OpenAI and Anthropic does control the whole stack, and they have access to the best IP essentially around the models. And I talked to a few of my scientific advisors in the AI space that work in academia or big companies, and the advice was don't worry, wait for another 3 months and things starts to come up. And then the first llama arrive, and then one by one, this model starts to arrive. They were first behind, and gradually, each time, the iterations to catch up with the frontier models, and the speed at which they move starts to shorten. And I think the last, 6-8 months, when we see that models like DeepSeek, QN, you can see they not only roughly catch up, they actually pretty much close the gap with a lot of the models from someone like OpenAI and Anthropic. Yes, in certain cases, they may still be behind, but it's clear the gap is not as huge as it used to be, right? And for a company like ours, that's critical because OpenAI doesn't need us necessarily. They had their own full stack. But everyone who wants to build something around open source ecosystem out of a sudden have a very competitive option, and it's cheap. Those tokens are cheap. There are options around to go and do it. So out of a sudden, it becomes a very profitable business, right? And people see the necessity for that. And it's good for the companies like ours that the open source models are actually available and open source, open weights models are available, and they're very competitive.
All right. I'm going to go back to you. How do you see the hardware constraints evolving in the next, I don't know, year or two? Are we past the worst of the GPU crunch? Are we entering a new phase? And also, how are your customers thinking about really chasing the next silicon versus optimizing on, smaller custom?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So as many of you remember, there was a period of time, maybe, I don't know, 12 months, 18 months ago, where hardware was impossible to find, right? Like everyone was chasing their connections, where I can find those 800s or H100s, like it was impossible to get. I think part of the reason on why that exists in the supply and build chain for NVIDIA AMD GPUs and Google TPUs was addressed, right? So I think that was some part of the process of the tape in the chip that was a bottleneck. Is not a bottleneck anymore. So right now I don't see myself a shortage of chips on the market. All the competition is about how you can utilize them well, so that performance per dollar would make sense, right? So it's obviously, if you want to run 100,000 GPU training job, the shortage of chips might be still there. But otherwise, I think it's there. So what's going to happen? It's quite interesting. There are several major players that I already mentioned, right, for the chip, like NVIDIA GPUs, AMD GPUs, Google TPUs, Amazon Inferentia, and there are quite a few startups, right, in the space. Whether they can actually get a niche market where those chips are valuable and performant, I think it's still a question. So I see them getting some segments, but still mainstream chips will be probably dominant. Like if we're talking about the next 12 to 18 months, I can safely say those are going to be the main drivers of the compute market, right? In terms of inference versus training and the new optimization, it was like if any of you guys have been to GTC this year, you might have seen how the message changed over just 1 year, right? So this year it was all about inference, right? So it's clear that we reached the stage where deployment of these models on a variety of different silicon is actually become their primary focus of the chip vendors. So definitely we're going to see a lot of silicon that try to be optimized for inference specifically. And they're going to be different segments. They're going to be mainstream cloud segment for all these LLMs, computer vision models. They're still probably going to be mostly in the cloud. But the models are getting smaller, and there clearly a lot of interesting things will happen at the edge. So I would expect they're going to be custom silicon for self-driving use cases, for everything that you can do on the smartphones. So Carmen is going to be an interesting area there as well.
I agree. I had one more question, but we're going to skip to the AI production deployment one. So how far along are we in production for generative AI deployments, usage? What are the most common failure modes that you guys are seeing? And what do you think the customers need from developers and vendors to accelerate adoption, overcome the difficulties?
Yeah, I guess the word would be, it's kind of Dickensian. It's best of times, worst of times. I'll start with the worst of times out there. It's bleak. When you talk to Main Street CEOs and CTOs and you say, hey, how far along are you with your AI efforts? You started them last year. How are things going? It's less than 20% for sure, probably less than 10% that they feel really happy about where they've been. And the best of times is, I think we're beginning to see just really common failure modes and being able to identify why these things don't work and getting people successful. I think the biggest, you can shout from the rooftops, evals. One of the big problems with all of this cool technology is everybody starts today at 60%. And for people who have built enterprise systems for years, that just feels bizarre. They feel like, oh my gosh, I'm almost ready for production. It is amazing. And I just started today. And then they spend a year flailing around in random directions to try to get to something that's acceptable. And it really comes down to evaluation, to working with subject matter experts in the company to know what good is for any particular use case. We're at a point where if model progress stopped tomorrow, and we would be upending industries for kind of the next 10 years, because really a lot of the work is just getting this stuff in patterns that enterprise architects understand, building kind of the eval infrastructure, the monitoring infrastructure, et cetera, to make these things work in the real world. And when that happens, just globally across industries, it's amazing. And we're beginning to see, very interesting systems beyond kind of typical corporate RAG systems that we've seen for the last year actually get good. We're seeing real-time agents at the moment that we were at a few years ago with ChatGPT, where it's not just a demo that sort of works, but you can feel a qualitative shift on latency. There's a lot to be excited about right now. There's an amazing amount of progress you can make quickly with very few people if you understand how to build these things in a way that aren't just demoware. And enough people have been burned last year that they're beginning to take lessons, and we're beginning to see things filter out into production in different customers.
I think it's a tale of, I internally call it a bifurcated market, but it's really a tale of two kinds of customers. The kinds of customers that aren't regulated and don't have sort of these rigid workflows are adopting like at scale, hyper exponentially. And examples of those are every code ID in the world. And so you can, whether it's Cursor or Lovable or Windsurf or GitHub or any of the others, right? So there's a very long list of those, and more coming every day. And then other companies that are sort of nascent agentic companies, Manus is a good example of one. The exponential curve that we're seeing from those companies in terms of adoption, it's remarkable, I'll say. So you can catch fire using Gen AI and be at a global scale almost immediately. So that's not a failure mode. I think we're seeing success, and then success begets success, right? As if you're an IDE and you've got a good sense of coding, you can then come back and talk to one of the foundation labs and say, these are the things that we need to work on for the next iteration. And our teams work together to try to make the models more successful at the tasks that their customers are leaning in on. Another set of super successful modes are, I don't know, we just did a cool thing with Fortnite, and where you could like talk to Darth Vader in a game, and it wasn't all Google models, but the model that generated the dialogue to say what to say, not the vocalization this time around, was a Google model. And so those kinds of things, I was thinking about it a year ago. You would have had to like pre-generate maybe 5,000 sequences like this, and you could do it, right? You could do the sequences at some sort of scale, and then you could do the voice generation at some kind of scale, and then put those in and trigger the right one at the right time. However, now it's fully generated in real time, so the latency came down quite a bit. The quality is really there, and it's a fun interaction. So those kinds of things we're in a success mode there. The creative places, the new video models that just came out those are early but super compelling. I've been playing with them. My 5-year-old loves playing with them with me. He can make Lego explode or do whatever he wants to do. So there's all sorts of things there that are working. Now the other half.
Side. Yeah.
The other half are large regulated customers. A global bank that I work with, a year ago, to get the model fit into their workflow, they came up with like an 11-page prompt. Some people are laughing, but this is where we all were a year ago. And they have to take that prompt along with the exact model, bring it to their model risk management team, and get the pairing of prompt and model approved. And so to change anything else, changing like 3 words in the prompt, anything material, I'll say, or changing the model, they have to go back through that for every single prompt.
Imagine Zach's trouble with dealing with an FDA. Every time you have to change a product, like everything you have to get that approved. Isn't that
Exactly.
crazy?
So again, maybe there's a loophole where someone on that side is reading the regulation wrong. I've challenged the banks to say, this is ridiculous. We need to figure out a better way, because they're not moving as quickly. And it goes actually back to evals, right? How do we have an eval process where they can just rerun the eval and say, new prompt, new model, evals pass, model risk management automatically sign off unless we're out of the error bars on the original eval, right? There's got to be a better way to do this. The old process is just being applied to the new thing. So you're seeing old sort of established industry, global banks, all the regulated folks, healthcare is equally important in this, move slowly because of that regulatory pressure. We also see customers that say we need to keep the model alive for X years because the SEC wants to know what we're doing, and we need to check all these other things that are going on. And so that's below the surface. If I was founding a company today, those are really big industries. When they move a lot of money. It's probably not the fastest way to iterate, even if there are these top-down mandates to try AI. If you want to get your lighthouse customer into production, there may be other places to go faster, even if they don't represent like double-digit millions in revenue. So it's just thinking about what your adoption life cycle is, what that sales cycle is. Even if the sales cycle is shortened from a top-down mandate, what does it take to move to production? And then how do you evolve with your customer? Because all of your products are new, and you're going to have week-over-week improvements. So how do your customers adopt those week-over-week improvements as well? It's a good thing to think about.
Okay, so that's kind of a nice transition to my next question, which is almost everyone in the audience is an early stage AI startup founder. What do you see as opportunities for startups to tackle, build, focus on as they try to build a competitive advantage against incumbents or platform providers? Open to whoever wants to jump in.
From my perspective, I would say the biggest opportunity is in the application space, high up the stack. So we see several use
Who's building
cases.
in the application space? Nice.
Yeah, so I see this as the best opportunity, because a lot of other levels like hardware, software stack, it's the first frontier things that gets commoditized first, right? So you would have to actually make sure that those are stable so that people can use it. They had the biggest funnel, they see a lot of first customers, but the real money will be happening when AI becomes at scales in real enterprise use cases. And as you said, essentially, there are areas where adoption is very slow, right? And there's nothing, like I also had to deal with a few banks, and it's just impossible. Like they don't operate at our pace. By the time they respond to the previous message, we already like tried 3 different models.
You didn't even mention on-prem, by the way, too, like the deployments.
Yeah, on-prem is also a dimension that some of them are regulated to the level that certain things that always has to run in their building on-prem.
Right.
And we actually support it. It's actually not that difficult to support it. Whether that would stay the mainstream use case or not, I don't know. I feel like gradually things will be dominated by the cloud anyway, right?
Yeah.
The cloud gets proper approvals, and I think on-prem is not going to last forever, right? That's just segment, right?
Good news for Jason.
Yeah.
We announced that we are offering our Ironwood TPU to be on-prem and GDC-H, Google Distributed Cloud Hosted. So if you need that, you can. On the other hand, I talked to a hedge fund. I was in their offices last week, maybe. Time flies. They're onboarding Google Cloud. They forgot how to onboard a cloud through their security process. They did Azure, they did AWS years ago. It's been so long since they had a reason to onboard a new cloud that they forgot how to do it. And so they're going through the process of onboarding Vertex because they want the Gemini models, because they're seeing current differentiation, and hedge funds are looking for any little bit of alpha they can get, right? Mm-hmm. So they're going through that pain. Their teams are looking for it. So I think there's a mix. Like I talked to some other like high frequency trading firms and other folks in the space that can afford that kind of compute. I think for the generic large bank, at some point you get comfortable with the fact that VPC-SC works, like all the security protocols just work well enough, and that you can create a good security posture around it.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo it. We rarely see customers that really want to escape the cloud and run their own infrastructure. It's like high frequency traders. It's we have a customer that builds cancer survivability models. all of their data is in hospitals and they can't egress the data, so they're having to do training in hospital Slurm clusters, things like that. So there are kind of niches here and there, but everybody is really comfortable with the cloud. Everybody loves Google Cloud. Everybody is comfortable with quickly deploying into an AWS or an Azure. Where people are, where there is a lot of opportunity out there is really around data control. That's an area where, and I'm not trying to be really alarmist. There are some alarmist companies that are just freaked out about anybody getting any sort of data, and there are regulatory concerns there in certain cases. But there is a fairly large underserved segment of customers kind of in this revolution that are very uncomfortable pushing their data out to an OpenAI. They just don't feel comfortable with it. The Gemma models are insanely good. The Llama models are good. And as they get smaller and smaller, they open up more and more use cases internally. We're seeing real time, I mean, every customer we talk to that is doing any sort of real-time voice, outbound agents, real-time video, they're so tired of bad latency. It is, if you do a demo with somebody that's been working with a bunch of real-time agent companies, you can watch them just and really try to quickly short circuit the talk because they get annoyed by bad latency. So they do things to the models in the demos where there's, they'll interrupt. They will ask questions quickly. They'll muffle their voice just to try to cause errors or latency. And for those customers where they're very sensitive to that, having internal small models that can respond quickly that are in the same VPC as the vector database, as all of the rest of the infrastructure is super important. And so there are big opportunities in those types of spaces.
All right, we have 2.5 minutes left, so I'm going to go more lightning type round. If you had to bet on one AI capability that enterprises aren't talking about enough, but it's going to be table stakes in the next, 12 to 18 months, what is it?
It is not one flashy thing. It is really just the boring integration stuff.
Okay.
That people are going to get it, and they're for just basic things. Models and all of the stuff around it is just going to be part of normal software patterns, and that's the thing that's going to change. And it's sneaky and it's boring and it's happening behind the scenes.
Go.
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually don't. Enterprises, in my opinion, are still significantly behind in the adoption. So it's not that something they would use 12 months from now was not yet invented. They actually just struggle to adopt things we already invented in the open source and in the frontier research labs. For example, favorite word everyone uses, agents or compound systems. Like people start to try them out, but most enterprises are not ready. And there are fundamental questions that had to be answered there. It's like, how am I going to debug this thing when it's going to crash? How am I going to reason about the quality of those things? Like, who is guilty? It's a distributed stochastic systems. Like, how to deal with that is a known problem, right? Until we solve this problem in either academia or in startups, they won't be able to, adopt it at scale. That's going to be still too risky for many of them. So those things that we need to address in the coming months, and that would be the next big thing they will probably start to use when it's ready.
Go.
I think building on that same idea, the idea that we can auto-generate evals and understand performance and understand where things are, the debugging layer, I think that there's an agentic flow with auto-generated evals that is finally about to get good enough that it'll be usable.
Hard to productionize right now.
Right, yeah, it's like that. We went through like a whole cycle of trying to figure out. I worked on bias, fairness, and explainability tools with predictive ML, like before generative ML. And that just has all gone away. Like no one's paying attention to that right now. because the technology is moving so quickly. So I think at this point, we're now in a better cycle where people are looking at what the production implications are. And as these complicated systems start to become possible, we'll start to look at better tooling. We want customers to migrate to the latest models as well. And so if you don't have that setup of evals to understand what's going on now, you actually can't figure out how do I upgrade technology to. And so you get left behind. If you're on a model from a year and a half ago, you're probably using something that's wildly not state of the art anymore. So it all ties together.
Okay, we might be over time, but I have one last question I want to ask everyone really quickly. So AI is really moving fast, changing every day. What advice do you have for people sitting in the audience to, stay up to speed? Like, do you have a favorite, author you follow, someone you listen to, any resource that you love to tap into?
Lots of different sources. My process is much more ad hoc than it was 4 or 5 years ago to do research. I used to feel pretty good about things. The kind of gem, there are good podcasts, there's good YouTube, but the gem, the thing that I would recommend to everybody is pay a lot of attention to kind of GitHub awesome lists. Spend a lot of time. This stuff is changing so quickly, and there are probably 20 different areas that you really need to be understanding what's coming out, what's interesting. That's one of the shortcuts that I use, but it's not enough. There's a lot you have to do in addition to that, but that's the one kind of gem I would recommend.
Put latest research papers into things like Notebook LM, create a podcast for yourself.
Yes, that's awesome.
And then just listen to it while you go do something else. Like that ephemeral kind of learning I found it to be super helpful when my team sends me papers that I don't fully understand. Like having that generated gets me the gist of it quickly. There are a lot of awesome creators out there doing really cool things. Like I actually spend my short amount of free time like scrolling on social media, actually paying attention to creators talking about my products, what they like, what they hate, other products, what's interesting in the market. And so, I probably have a list of 5 or so that I kind of come back to over and over again, but curate who's speaking to you at the level that you want to be spoken to, because not everybody wants to be in the race of this model's better, that model's better, like that may not be useful for you. So find that sort of the right take on it. But getting down to the research papers themselves gives you a sense of what's 6 months from now or a year from now.
Yeah. On my end, I can say in the spirit of using ML and AI, I use 2 types of filters. The first filter is social network. So I use LinkedIn feed a lot. So everything that's important pops up for me very quickly there within a day usually. And the second one is more human-centric. So I go for lunches with my graduate student, PhD students and engineers all the time. And if something interesting comes up, they'll let me know immediately, right? So that's very quick feedback. Usually 24 hours and I would know if there's anything interesting came up. And then I pay attention and read myself. The problem with papers is like NeurIPS, like Top ML conference produce, 10,000 papers or something a year. It's just impossible to track, right? So it's just really difficult.
Dump it into Gemini.
Yeah.
Young engineers are just awesome as a resource.
Yeah, this is the best. Yes.
Yeah.
Just
All
learn
right,
from them.
we're really out of time. Thanks so much for joining us today.